guy who went to sort of a sister church of ours in Kiev, and he was serving as a chaplain for actually from back in 2014. So he's been serving for all these years. Father of 5 kids under the age of 18, and just a couple of weeks ago he was killed. So he wasn't a close friend of ours personally, but a lot of people we know very well were close friends with him. And so that, I mean, it just strikes when it strikes. And so it's very, it's hard. It's exhausting. It's heartrending, to have to go through those sorts of losses.
I think it actually became quite well known since the outbreak of this conflict that kind of when Christmas was to be celebrated was sort of slightly different perhaps to what we might be used to in the UK. So just explain what happened and what's going to happen this year.
So this year is the first year that Ukraine will be celebrating Christmas on December 25th only, along with most of the rest of the Western world. There's kind of a long history, which I don't want to bore your listeners with necessarily, but basically there was calendar reforms, back in the Middle Ages. We all switched over to the Gregorian calendar, but the Eastern Orthodox Church did not. And so they kept on the old Julian calendar, and because of that, the dates over time shifted, and so the Julian calendar's date of December 25th falls on the Gregorian calendar's date of January 7th. The Julian calendar date of December 25th falls on the Gregorian calendar date of January 7th. So technically, everybody always celebrated on December 25th. It was just different calendars. But over time, at some point, a lot of the more Western churches among Eastern Orthodox Christians switched to what they call a new Julian calendar. So they basically adopted what we know as December 25th date. So even the Greek Orthodox Church, Romanian Orthodox, Bulgarian Orthodox, like they've all done December 25th for a long time. And so because of that shift, it kind of happened to where a lot of the churches that still use the January date were the ones that were associated with kind of, Russia and the former Russian Empire. So Ukraine in 2014, when this war actually started, right? Not the full scale that it is today, but did start in 2014 when Russia took over Crimea. Shortly thereafter, first of all, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church got its own official recognition from kind of Constantinople, like among the community of national, Orthodox churches, and also made December 25th a second official Christmas date. So we had 2 official Christmases for a while.
That's nice.
Which, was great because who doesn't love more holidays? It didn't necessarily mean more presents because here in Ukraine, because of the Soviet Union, the main winter holiday is actually still New Year's. So that was something the Soviet Union did, trying to sort of stamp out any last, inkling of Christianity. They wanted to essentially cancel Christmas. People didn't like it. They tried to just take it away initially. But people revolted because they liked their presents and they liked their traditions. So what they did, which was actually kind of smart, in an evil genius sort of way on their part, was to switch it all over to New Year's. So we, to this day, don't have Christmas trees. We have New Year's trees. We don't have Christmas presents. We have New Year's presents. So those sorts of things are still associated with New Year's. And Christmas here is more of a family holiday. It's like getting together, eating a meal. It would probably be closer to, like, in the United States, what Thanksgiving might be. So anyway, so we did have 2 official Christmases for a while. And then this year is the first year that we've said, in an effort to move as far away as possible from, kind of anything having to do with Russia for obvious reasons, we're canceling the January 7th date. And now we've only got December 25th along with the rest of the Western world.
Wow. And I imagine, given the context, that has been quite welcome. Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, so they actually did a poll. I mean, our church, even though we are a Protestant church rather than, Eastern Orthodox, and a lot of Protestant churches, just because they're more associated with the West, celebrated December 25th for years and years. We did not, because we wanted to be, kind of relevant and understandable to the local population, which recognized January 7th. So we did January 7th for years and years. We actually switched last year
Okay.
because they had taken a poll among Ukrainians, and at that point, a majority were in favor of switching the date. So they were already in favor last year, but then the Orthodox Church here, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, didn't officially make the switch until this year.
Got you.
Yeah.
Benjamin, with that in mind, then, I think it's worth, it's been a while since we heard from you on Times Radio. What is daily life like for you? You are living in a war zone. Does that affect you every day? What are you doing every day?
Yeah. Well, this year, as you may be able to tell, thank God, we have electricity. There's the lights shining in the
Yeah.
ceiling. Because at this time last year, we were sitting in the dark
Mm-hmm.
more than half the time, literally. So that was, very difficult psychologically. It was difficult to get much done. Today, I mean, we go about doing what we're doing as a church, which is continuing to serve the locally displaced, internally displaced Ukrainians that have come to our city. So we've got around 7,000 in our city, which before the war, the city was only about 50,000. So, it's grown by, what is it, maybe 7-ish%, 8-ish%. Or no, sorry, my math is off. It's grown by like 15%,
More than
right?
10%. Yeah, 15.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, the population of the city has expanded, and our city had a difficult situation with finding decent work anyway, and now that has compounded. So a lot of people are really in need of aid. So our church gives out food aid once a month to about 2,000 people. So it's usually the same people that come kind of once a month. Sometimes we'll get new people in, sometimes people will move on, but mostly it's kind of the same group of people. And because it's the same people every month, we've also been able to sort of build relationships with them, not just sort of hand them a bag of food and say goodbye, but ask how they're doing, find out about their families, offer to pray for them, just to support them in whatever way we can, not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. So we continue to do that. Again, much easier to do that when there's electricity. So I mean, it's a weird combination. If somebody comes to Ukraine, as long as you're not going near the front line, if you go near the front line, it's very, very different. Explosions sort of, I mean, they don't let civilians go near the front line.
Sure.
But it's, just hell, to put it simply. But other places, you would go, and you might think just kind of there wasn't a war going on. Like, life looks like it's continuing as usual. People go to work, they go to the mall, they eat out in restaurants, but at the same time, there are clear giveaways. So there's, air raid sirens multiple times a day, which at this point most people just ignore, quite honestly, because you can't live your life sitting in a bomb shelter.
Yeah.
There's obviously people in military fatigues everywhere. There are checkpoints still in a few places, although less than in the beginning of the war. And everybody. I mean, the sad reality is that everybody knows somebody, probably somebody close, who is serving in the army, who's serving on the front lines. Almost everybody knows somebody who's been killed. And if it's not somebody who was particularly close, then you're probably lucky.
Mm.
We have not a friend, but an acquaintance guy who went to sort of a sister church of ours in Kiev, and he was serving as a chaplain from back in 2014. So he's been serving for all these years. Father of 5 kids under the age of 18, and just a couple of weeks ago he was killed. So he wasn't a close friend of ours personally, but a lot of people we know very well were close friends with him. And so that, I mean, it just strikes when it strikes. And so it's very, it's hard. It's exhausting. It's heartrending, to have to go through those sorts of losses. But For us, I mean, the thing that keeps us going is being able to offer hope to people in this time. Being able to be what we obviously as a church consider to be, the light of Christ in the midst of darkness. And yeah, so it can get discouraging, but also very encouraging, when we hear, people from outside of Ukraine, still interested, still, concerned about Ukraine, still, praying for Ukraine. So even, your invitation column to kind of come on and give an update, like, oh, hey, the world, has not forgotten about us, like
Yeah,
it is an encouragement.
definitely.
Yeah.
Have you been there throughout, Benjamin, since the full scale invasion started? Have you had a chance to leave? Have you had any respite?
So well, other than being the pastor of a local congregation, I am also I oversee training for a ministry called City to City Europe, which involves a lot of traveling within Europe, kind of training of people starting new churches and whatnot. The first 8 months of the war, I did not travel anywhere. So I sat here, in Svetlovodsk, for a number of reasons, both just the huge volume of needs. At that point, we were housing people, in our church building as refugees. We were running evacuation runs to the front. Like there was, it was a different dynamic. And of course, in the early days of the war, there was, a sense of like nobody knew how far things would go. At some point last year in the fall, kind of, looking at the things happening on the ground, looking at what might or might not potentially happen, my family and I discussed it and prayed about it and felt that, it was okay for me to do some traveling again. So, for my role with City to City. So, yeah, so I have traveled, outside of Ukraine, a decent amount since the fall of last year, but, continue living here.
Mhm.
So but most of that's work. It's not vacation.
Yeah, I was going to say that's exactly what I was going to
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
It's kind of it just because listening to that, feeding 2,000 people a month,
hmm,
constant air raid sirens, whether
right,
they've become like fire alarms in public places here that everyone just ignores and carries on shopping, for example, or not. All of that is just relentless. That it
yeah, yeah,
doesn't stop.
right,
It's people will be listening to this and thinking, how do you keep going?
yeah. Well, that's a good question. We have taken, a week here, a week there, a couple times
Hmm.
to try to get some rest. One of them turned out not so well because we got the stomach flu.
Oh no,
So it was like, not it
typical.
was a vacation after which you need a vacation. Didn't go
Yeah.
so well. Um, the first time we traveled out, very first time, was actually to renew. This was before the U.S. embassy. Me being a U.S. citizen,
Hmm.
my son also has U.S. citizenship, so his passport was expiring. We needed to renew it. So the first time we traveled out was, I think it was August of 2022. Just drove out because there are no flights in or out of Ukraine
Hmm.
for obvious reasons right now,
Hmm.
because nobody wants to get a passenger jet shot down. So you have to drive out if you want to kind of go really anywhere. So we had to drive out to Moldova, which is, for us from where we live, that's the nearest direction. It's still like an 11-hour drive. It's not close.
Wow.
So to travel anywhere, like there's a lot of journeying involved.
Hmm.
Anyway, the first time we got out, and we were in Chisinau, the capital city, which is a larger city. I remember my son kind of like was a little bit nervous, and he's like, is it safe? Like, because we're in a big city, and I'm like, buddy, we're not in Ukraine. Like, yeah, it's okay. And like it was weird that there were no air raid sirens. Like it was very quiet. So I mean, kind of the first time out, like it's kind of hits you as like this weird reverse shock of like, oh yeah, there is normal life out there somewhere, and the realities of war are not normal.
Yeah.
But again, it's strange and sad what you do get used to living in this context. Yeah. So as far as kind of support though, we've had a group come out, which is a group that offers kind of psychological support and training for those, particularly in disaster zones and conflict zones.
Mhm.
So we had them come out last summer to run some training. So we're actually hoping that they'll be able to come out again the end of next month in January. Yeah.
And that's an interesting point because however trained and prepared you are for ministry, even if it's ministry abroad in a country, that you're not from, surely there is very little that can be done to prepare you for ministry in war time.
Uh, let me say that it was not part of our long-term ministry strategy.
Sure.
You know,
I can
to
imagine.
be
Yeah.
offering humanitarian aid and running evacuation runs to front lines of a war. Certainly, that, I mean, was not something that we were planning on. But again, I mean, our belief is that it did not sneak up on the Lord. It was not a surprise, and my wife and I. So my wife is Ukrainian. She's from
Mm-hmm.
here. She's never really lived anywhere else. And I've lived here for almost 22 years now, like, longer than I lived anywhere else. So this feels like home. Nevertheless, like my wife and I, in the very beginning, before the war started, we knew there was a possibility, and kind of talked, and prayed about it. And we just felt like, we have to stay. This is what God has given us to do. Originally, we had thoughts about sending our kids out to my mom's in the States, but then they didn't want to. They're both already teenagers. They didn't want to be separated. They didn't want to leave, and this is their home too.
Mm.
So we ended up staying together. But yeah, I mean, lots of things you just have to figure out kind of as you go, which I think, in general, one of the reasons I think, Ukraine has fared so well, among others, in this war, better than many people expected, is Ukrainians are very flexible and entrepreneurial, in general. And part of that is maybe just because of the chaos of a lot of our history here. And so you kind of, you don't rely on things being stable. And so you're ready to kind of, shift very quickly. And I think that actually ended up helping us,
Mm-hmm.
in this situation. For us, and I think I may have mentioned this, Callum, when we talked previously. For us, it's not to say that, like, everybody, or even everybody who's a church minister, should have stayed. Like, no, like, if you were in one of those cities that ended up getting occupied, you should have left.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have waited around for that. You should have got everybody else that you could out. But for us, we felt that this is where we needed to stay. I've got a friend who is pastor in another city even further southeast than us. And he said, in this kind of a situation, there's no right answers. There's only what God is calling you to. And I think that's wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and just that sort of determination to keep going, I suppose, is it struck me every time we've spoken, Benjamin, that you do just keep going, and without wishing to be whatever flippant or trite about it, who would feed those 2,000 people a month if not you? The work you're doing is so obvious and so amazingly impactful. I think for
I
those
appreciate
people
that.
who have been disrupted by this thing, it is astonishing. Do you still feel that sense of determination as we're at Christmas time? It's odd, isn't it? Because these moments in the year offer chances for reflection. I mean,
Sure.
some of us are lucky we get some holiday and we get some downtime. And there's a lot of thinking time and it's all quiet and all of that. But I just wonder how different Christmas feels this year, actually, for you compared to the other days of the year.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Christmas is not usually a time of rest for church ministers in general.
Fair point.
it's
Yeah,
it's
good
one
point.
of the more hectic seasons, actually. So I don't know that even if there wasn't a war, that I would be getting much
Yeah,
rest in
true.
the season. Um, yeah, but I think we are determined,
Hmm.
and as you said, I mean, that is the reality, is that in our city we are the only ones offering regular humanitarian aid. Not the city, not other organizations. Like, if we, very bluntly, as you said, like, if we weren't doing it, who would be doing it?
Mm.
And so again, that goes back to the idea that we believe we're here for a reason. And part of that is just serving all these many thousands of people. It's exhausting. Yeah, gets exhausting. And so we're trying to think, and that's part of why we are hoping to get this group to come, and looking for some funds to do that. Um, to offer psychological support to basically our frontline, on the ground team of those who are, twice a week, every week, interacting with all these hundreds and thousands of refugees. And very often, again, not just sort of giving them a bag of stuff, because maybe that would not be too difficult, but like actually sitting and listening to their
Mm.
stories, listening to, weeping with them, literally. Um, so is there a determination to keep going? Yeah, there is. Does it also get exhausting though? Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to think through, how can we keep our team going, more long term. I mean, again, when this all started, nobody thought it would go this long. There were some very optimistic estimates in the very beginning of like 2-3 weeks,
Mm.
uh, and then it turned into 2-3 months, and God forbid it turns into 2 or 3 years. But obviously we're coming up on 2 years in
Yeah.
February. Um, and aside from some sort of a radical shift, especially if that's something that sort of things begin to crumble there internally in Russia, that could turn things quickly, of course, in our favor. But if the status quo holds, or I mean, again, God forbid that, I'm sure probably a lot of people are aware in the news, the big military aid package to Ukraine in the United States was held up,
Held up. Yeah.
unfortunately, by some very short-sighted, in my view, bickering about other issues. Not seeing I guess, the global scale of how this affects everybody. It's not just some little local thing that you can sort of be like, oh well, just let them deal with that on their own. Like it's particularly for Europe, but really for the entire world. I don't, I mean, it is interesting to me, and this is just my completely amateur take on it. I'm not a military analyst, or a political analyst or anything like that. At the same time, I don't think it's entirely a coincidence that you see kind of these flare ups starting to happen of Hamas's attack on Israel, Venezuela wanting to take over a big chunk of Guyana. I think the message, unfortunately, the message that the West has sent is authoritarian regimes can do this to smaller neighbors. Obviously there's a different dynamic there with Hamas and everything, but uh, you know, authoritarian, slash terrorist regimes can do these sorts of things and get away with it. And they're not so, I mean, yes, there's a reaction, but it's not so strong as to immediately crush down any thoughts from other authoritarian regimes, uh, you know, of doing similar things.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's been said at some points. Again, we're deeply grateful for all the help that we've gotten, from the West, different Western nations. Uh, at the same time, it's obviously come a lot slower than we asked for, than we hoped for. Sometimes statements have been made that the Ukraine has gotten enough aid to survive, but not enough aid to win.
Mm-hmm.
Which in some sense is true. And at the same time, in this particular case, Russia, has been slapped with some consequences, but not enough to really 100% change the dynamic of the game. And so, my fear is that message globally is that, like, hey, these other authoritarian regimes that are thinking about, I mean, obvious case in point, we all know kind of what China has said about Taiwan. God forbid that they get the message that they could do something like that and get away with it. So I think that, kind of these, in comparison to that, there's almost this ironic fear of like, oh, well, if we go too strongly, like we're going to end up causing World War III. No, if you don't go strongly enough, that will cause World War III, because you will send the message to all these authoritarian regimes that they can sort of band together, help each other, and just attack whoever the hell they want, you know. So anyway, yes, I'll get down off my soapbox now. But
No, it's a real thought, because, as you say, I've not been doing this job a long time, and in the 3 years and a bit that I've been doing it, I've now been reporting on 2 wars, and
yeah,
that is astonishing. And heartbreaking, actually, in so many ways. Benjamin, we must ask, how can we support what you're doing? 2,000 people a month is no small matter. It is a big deal, actually, and that needs resourcing. And so, how do we help?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Callum. I mean, first of all, just getting the word out, and again, thank you for this opportunity just to come on and share about what's still going on in Ukraine, to remind people that it's still going on. For people who are people of faith, I would say, please continue praying for Ukraine, and that justice, and a just peace would be established, which means a Ukrainian victory, because obviously anything less than that is unjust. It's a flagrant violation of kind of international laws and justice and whatnot. So I say that only because there is a nuance. Sometimes people just sort of pray for like the war to stop, and I'm like, well, that's good, but we don't want the war to just stop. Like we want, a just peace. So certainly we need material resources, to keep doing what we're doing. We've got a partner organization in the U.S., which is registered charity, that people can donate through. So there's a link to do that, bit.ly/give to Ukraine with the number 2. So bit.ly/give to Ukraine would be a way that people could donate to help us continue doing what we're doing.
Benjamin, thank you very much. It's really nice to catch up with you once again. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Appreciate it.
Cheers.